In this short vignette, I interview Bruce Avolio about his understanding of authentic leadership and its application in a developmental sense, but also the measure of authentic leadership itself. In the last 10 years particularly, you've given very special attention to what we now call authentic leadership and been a leader in this field along with others. I wonder if you could talk to us about that and unpack it for us from a developmental perspective.
So I'm glad you added the developmental perspective, because people have drawn me into looking at what an authentic leader is, who they are, where they come from, and so forth. And my interest has really been not just on that, but on what actually develops people to be seen by others and themselves as authentic. And so what we meant by authentic leadership development is what psychologists might refer to as in vivo versus in vitro. So in vivo is in life. Things happen that develop experiences. In vitro might be going to a classroom where it's a more structured situation and pulls you out of the realities of life and puts you into a classroom where you discuss things about life. And so we thought, let's take a look at what are the kinds of events, situations, and moments that accelerate leadership development. The reason why I chose the term acceleration is that life does it without any help. You go through life and things happen and it will shape your development, and life can be sloppy, and it can take, sometimes it takes 20 or 30 years. Sometimes it takes 6 months. And we thought, let's try to figure out what are the things that trigger genuine leadership development in terms of what? Self-awareness. In terms of what? Moral reasoning. In terms of how you develop others. In terms of how you establish trust. So if you say all those things that are important to leadership, what actually helps to develop those things? And so we start to unpack that, as you said, and go into looking at the events in life that shape that. And so where do those come from? A lot of times it comes from teachers, elementary school teachers, coaches, and ministers, and rabbis, and priests, and someone on the street. And all along the way, these things fall into your life. And we thought maybe we should just try to push them into life a little bit too, to see if we could trigger development. And that's kind of where we've gone. So taking the events that are shaping development on the positive side of authentic development, authentic leadership, transformational, and then figure out what it is. Now, people had looked at Zeleznik's work on the twice-born leader. People are aware of the crucible events, as Warren Bennis has called it. And I think what got ignored was the everyday events that oftentimes people come back to years later, like a conversation with a teacher that suggested to someone, you're going in a good direction, keep going. And that person not having the self-confidence until being affirmed or validated by that teacher, and then going further on and becoming very successful because that person helped them. That event triggered something that helped their development.
So one of the interventions that you've been working with us in the workshop and with others has been helping people to remember memorable moments.
Right.
And would you like to, as if this audience that's watching this, ask us such an exercise?
So there's some ways that we can help that they're fairly cost-effective ways to do this. One is just to get people more mindful. So over the last 10 years, I've become very mindful of the moments that I have with people, more so than I did before. So, and I've had moments with you that have shaped my thinking about me and you, our relationship, and the people you work with. And I have moments with the workshop participants. And when you're in a different culture, you have a lot of moments, that if you're mindful of, because it's different. But when you go back home, oftentimes you don't keep your mindfulness. So one simple strategy that some of our coaches do is simply text someone and say, has there been a challenge in the last few days that has got you to think about how you advocate your values, your most important values? It's a very nice way of triggering for people, and it's simple. So we want to just include that in a routine. Every once in a while, send myself a text message that says, hey, think about, what did you do this morning? Like I ask people, what's the first thing you did when you started working with your new team? The first thing. When they walked in the room and sat down, the first words, what did you say? Was it a joke? Did you start with your agenda? Did you ask them their names? Did you tell them about yourself? And when you do that, you become much more mindful of what happens in the first interactions, oftentimes are what we remember. So it's a way of triggering mindfulness. I think that's the point.
One of the ways that practitioners often start thinking about authentic leadership is that they look for a measure of it and a scale and so on, and then they get a report and they can work with that. So that's another take-off point from what you've been talking about, which is different from a developmental orientation, which is the natural everyday trigger points for this. Would you like to comment on the utility of any measure of authentic leadership and how it can be helpful or unhelpful?
Well, I always think feedback is helpful if you're ready for it. And sometimes people aren't necessarily ready for that formal feedback that you get through surveys and 360s or peer-to-peer and things like that. But it is, for many of us, including myself, I mean, it's a moment when you open a report and, someone says, I don't think you're very transparent, which is one of the factors that are part of authentic leadership. So I think that the survey, like every other kind of trigger, it's a little bit more thought about ahead of time, like we have to get your survey done by, and we're going to give you your report by. And in life, those things are not necessarily that planned. And so sometimes the things that happen in life happen around a time where you have a lot of emotion. And because of that, it becomes much more memorable and something you come back to over time. Whereas with a survey, sometimes the survey just doesn't hit at the right time. And you're not ready for it, to go back to what I said earlier. And because of that, you're not going to extract out as much meaning. So I oftentimes think with surveys, we should give it to people and then say, okay, we're going to take it back and we'll come back again. Or maybe give it to them in parts so that we have a chance of hitting them at those moments where it might really matter for them to listen to the feedback and use the feedback to become more aware. I mean, so the idea of leader self-awareness, which is another component that we measure, is that the process of giving feedback is to enhance self-awareness. But so is just telling people in the morning, when you go out, what's the first thing you focus on when you meet your coworkers? What do you end the day with? When's the last time you recognized somebody for something you really valued? I mean, those all fit into leader self-awareness and becoming more genuine about how you relate to people. And maybe a survey helps with that.